Pastor Mai, good afternoon. Welcome to Mannin Line today. Minister for Justice and Home Affairs, Poole-Wilson, MHK, is with us. Also, Chief Executive Dan Davies. So if you want to talk about police, the constabulary, fire and rescue, cyber security, fireworks, prison, probation, emergency planning, civil defence, anti-money laundering, disclosure and barring, licensing, parole, road safety, or whatever's on your mind, then do get in touch between now and 1. So, Faster Mike, good afternoon. Poole-Wilson and Dan Davies.
Faster my Andy.
Good to have you along. Thanks for being with us today. Let's get straight to the phone lines. And Julian, you're live with the Home Affairs and Justice Department.
Oh, hi, Andy, and hello, Jane and Dan.
Hi, Julian.
Hello.
Hi. I've got two questions for you, so I'll give you them both at the same time. What is the current status of the Isle of Man in terms of opting out of the new Pandemic Prevention, Preparedness and Response Accord? Are we able to opt out of the UK's if they go through with it, if they do nothing and allow it to become subject to the Accord? And the other question is, I've also noticed that the World Health Organization intends to initiate over 300 amendments to the current international health regulations, including the removal of the paragraph, and I'll quote it, with full respect for the dignity, human rights and fundamental freedoms of persons. It seems that they're going to try and do this to the 194 member countries, granting themselves ultimate power and experience via Articles 13A and 42, surveillance of the public with the ability to lock down mandatory vaccinations via Article 18. Just wondered, do you feel that that should be something, because in theory you may have to enforce surveillance and arrests of Manx citizens under the controls of an unelected foreign diktat in the future. Have you got any kind of concerns over that?
Thanks, Julian. I think just on the second point, I think it would be premature actually for me to comment without actually really having a full appreciation of the proposed changes that you're referencing. And I suppose the area that you're talking about is initially public health regulation, which in and of itself Home Affairs isn't responsible for. But in terms of any changes that might come from an organisation like the World Health Organization, we would obviously monitor what is going on. And then, we have the power, and we do have our own public health regulations in the Isle of Man. So it would be a question really of monitoring what any proposed changes are and then taking stock of what it meant for the Isle of Man. And as regards matters of enforcement, obviously, when it comes to enforcement, we enforce against our own laws as opposed to somebody else's laws, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And what about the opt-out option? If the UK decides, because this is an opt-out, it's a bit like organ donation, unless you send a letter to the WHO saying you don't want to be subject to their control over basically everything that we can do. If the UK was to allow it to happen, would the Isle of Man, do we have a separate opt-out ability, or do we just have to follow the UK?
Again, Julian, I think it's one of those matters that without seeing the detail of what is being proposed, what the UK is planning to do, and whether or not the Isle of Man is affected, it's quite difficult to comment. So, there are, for example, areas of UK legislation which we, by agreement, the Isle of Man decides to extend to itself, but we do that in full consultation with the UK and in the full knowledge of the implications. But I think at this point, it's not really easy for me to comment on this because it's not clear to me, without looking into it properly, exactly what is being proposed, what steps the UK would take, and obviously we would engage with them as to how potentially it may or may not affect the island.
Okay. Julie, just if you could summarise what your concerns are.
Well, basically, the WHO, within their 300 amendments and also in this new Pandemic Prevention, Preparedness and Response Accord, they have altered all the wording, and including in the accord, they're saying that they can call a pandemic response over and above the local governments in any country or all of them at the same time, not even if there is proof that there is one. So that's basically surrendering sovereignty of your ability to govern your own jurisdiction. We showed some of that here because we shut the borders, whereas the UK didn't really do that to the extent that we did. Or whether or not you agree with it or not, we did have that ability to control our borders to a degree. I'm just interested to know if the UK goes and allows itself to surrender its sovereignty in terms of, and also all the attendant thing with Jane, about if we do go along with this and an unelected group in another part of the world is basically saying you have to arrest people who decide that they're not going to abide by their diktats, the local police are going to have to arrest people on the basis of unelected people not on the island. So that's my concern is how can we opt out of this? I mean, my understanding is that there's an initial opt-out on December the 1st. Well, we're in October now, so we need to sort of maybe get a bit accelerating on knowing exactly what our options are if we've only got just over a month to sort this out.
Dan Davies?
I think with any sort of international accord, it's down to the jurisdiction to make laws that represent the terms of the agreement. And so it would be a matter ultimately for Tynwald to determine whether or not it was to implement the requirements as set out in any accord if it was extended to the Isle of Man. So, and I would probably take issue a little bit with saying that this would supersede the sovereignty, because with any accord, it's down to the member states to determine how it implements laws to match the agreement, and that will obviously have to go through the parliamentary process. So it doesn't. I would probably say it wouldn't compromise the sovereignty of the Isle of Man in this case.
Okay, all right. Thanks, Julian.
Thanks, Andy.
All right, good to hear from you. And David's on now. Hi, David. You're live with Jane Poole-Wilson and Dan Davies.
Hi, Andy, and the Minister and the Chief Executive there. Two questions, and one's probably fairly easy. Regarding, some time ago, a lady contacted me regarding neighbourhood problems, massive loads of vehicles being parked on the highway in a home zone, and she wrote, I went to see her, she wrote a handwritten letter, an A4 sheet, and to the Chief Constable of the Isle of Man. I picked it up, delivered it to the police station, and to date, she hasn't received any correspondence from the Chief Constable. So can I ask, not a political question, ask Dan, Mr. Davis there, what's the procedure regarding members of Tynwald, ministers and chief executives, and that would include the Chief Constable as well, responding to correspondence?
Generally, people would uphold the standards which are set out by the Public Services Commission, which are 10 days for non-complex inquiries and 20 days for complex inquiries. But I would have expected an email to go back, and the constabulary are normally pretty good at answering correspondence. But if the person wants to get in touch with the department, we'll certainly pass that letter on.
She'll be listening today, don't worry. Now, don't forget, we're talking about an 80-plus person here, doesn't have a computer, doesn't have a laptop, but corresponds lovely with pen and ink and delivered. That's what I feel is embarrassing to our police force at the minute. And I wanted to ask sometime regarding, the other one I was going to ask too, is regarding vaping, because we're actually killing a generation that's growing up which thinks it's cool to vape. They're doing it in schools. You look at the schools now. I've got grandchildren at schools too. And you see the smoke coming out at playtime in the schools at Bemaheg there. What is the government doing to put the legislation through, like it is in the UK, to stop it?
So
You've got to be older.
So, David, I don't know if you've been following, but we have actually got a vaping products bill that is going through the branches at the moment. It's completed its passage through Keys before the end of the last parliamentary year, and so is about to go through the Legislative Council. And absolutely this was recognised as something that we needed to be responsive on very, very quickly. So it wasn't originally in the legislative programme for this administration, but absolutely it was recognised. It was a rising issue, particularly for young people, and on the precautionary basis, because there is more and more research coming out. You're absolutely right about the harms for people who have never smoked before. And so we recognised we needed to do something, and there was a rapid period of consultation. The bill was drafted, it's made its way through Keys, it will be moving through Legislative Council when we sit again, and I hope we will be able to press for royal assent as soon as possible so we can bring that into force.
Is it the use, the sale, the advertising, or the availability? What is it?
It covers a number of areas, Andy. It covers obviously the sale, so banning sale to under 18s, but alongside that, similarly with as we've done with tobacco products, it's about how you can display products. So it covers in specialist vaping shops, for example, that under 18s wouldn't be able to go in, or where under 18s can go in, that vaping products must be not on display, as we would expect with tobacco products.
What about the purchase on behalf of a minor?
Yes, that is also covered in the legislation.
So if somebody bought a load of vapes for somebody who was under 18, they could be prosecuted?
Yeah, sale or supply, and supply would cover that situation.
David?
Andy, the crucial question is, when is it going to happen? Is it before Christmas? Because if you've got to go through the branches, why wasn't it done in the summer? Why wasn't it sailing through when the rest of them were on holiday? Why wasn't these things need to be done? And I know you're going to give me we've got to go through a procedure on that. But when you're killing people, which these products are killing people or causing issues to health and family distress, things need to be done. Yeah. What happened when our differences make us different? Okay. I'll leave you at that.
Yeah, thank you, David. I mean, to a lot of parents who are tearing their hair out about vaping, when vaping was supposed to be a route out of smoking, not a route into smoking, when will it come on the statute book?
Well, as I say, it's about to start its passage through Legislative Council, and I hope it will pass through Legislative Council as expeditiously as possible. I mean, it's important, with all of these things, that we scrutinise our legislation properly.
Nobody's against it, though, are they?
No. Often with legislation, the devil is in the detail, which is why it's important to try and look at it and make sure it's right. But we are absolutely keen to then make sure it moves through Legislative Council as quickly as possible, and then engage with the Ministry of Justice to try and get royal assent for the bill, so that we can see it get onto the statute book and then bring it into force.
OK, two questions now about the steam packet. One, basically, either side of the argument. I'd like to ask the Minister how much money spent on security provision at the sea terminal, and why do we need military-style bomb checks? Is it a bit heavy-handed? On the other one, Janet in Laxey said, that was a texter 284, by the way. This is Janet in Laxey, and says, does the steam packet supply names of passengers to the police or Home Affairs prior to departure?
So if I take Janet's question first, not on a routine basis. So where there are specific grounds for the constabulary to be able to ask for any passenger information, they can do so. But one of the other challenges we have is that passenger data is not verified data when it comes from the steam packet. So it is possible in particular cases, but it is not supplied as a routine matter. As to port security, that's actually looked after by the Department of Infrastructure. And in terms of managing a proportionate level of security at our ports, I'm sure all your listeners will be fully aware, because there's been a lot of coverage of the amount of drugs that can be trafficked into the island, and also money, the proceeds of crime, that can be trafficked out of the Isle of Man. And it's my personal view that we do have to take a proportionate approach if we want to maintain a secure and safe island, and we want to be proactive about thwarting serious and organised criminals and their desire to, exploit people and bring criminality onto the Isle of Man, then we absolutely have to take a proportionate response to maintaining access and security around our ports.
OK. If I can just simplify it, Dan Davies. So a known drugs trafficker from the northwest or Liverpool could give a false name at Heysham or Liverpool, walk onto the boat, and we wouldn't be any the wiser.
That's the way the system currently works, yeah.
So, I mean, does Home Affairs have a view about where that should lead us to?
I think the department is concerned about organised criminal gangs exploiting the island's position within the common travel area, and so it's something I think that is on the minds of the Council of Ministers. It's something that's certainly on the minds of the Chief Constable, and I know Council are looking at the best way to ensure the island is secure and people are protected from organised criminal gangs.
Yes, Jane Poole-Wilson certainly chatted to the Chief Constable. He's very aware of criminal gangs, criminal families on the Isle of Man who are hooking up with gangs in the northwest. Is there a simple solution to this?
No, I think it's a very complex problem because this criminality is viewed, I think, by the most serious criminals as a business, and the Isle of Man is the end of a market. So actually, the proceeds or the amount that can be accrued from the supply of drugs into the Isle of Man is proportionately higher to what it would be in parts of the northwest in the UK. So it is a lucrative market. And I think, our constabulary, I know, work incredibly hard, sharing intelligence and engaging with Merseyside Constabulary and other police forces in the UK to try and do the utmost to be on top of this problem and to intercept activity. But it is a challenge when because we are part of the common travel area and that freedom of movement that we all enjoy. That is a challenge when it comes to trying to intercept and even try and track patterns of movement, regularity of trips. And so that is the piece that, there has to be a proportionate response if we are going to meaningfully tackle this problem and try and stay ahead of this challenge.
So DOI is responsible for security at the sea terminal. What's the preponderance, what's the likelihood of police drugs dogs being there?
So there are various powers for customs officers and also police officers, and that's why you will sometimes see people working in conjunction together and we do see police officers with drugs dogs both at the airport and at the sea terminal.
We're live with Jane Poole-Wilson and Dan Davies.
Yeah, the police take a targeted intelligence-led approach to keeping the borders safe or the ports safe. So they will act on intelligence and they will use whatever methods they need to do at the time to either identify known criminals or to act on intelligence. And they work together with colleagues from the Customs and Excise Division and also from the Immigration Division.
But what happens about the post coming in?
So that's then a matter for the Post Office, but then also the Customs and Excise team have powers to intercept mail under certain circumstances. So they work together very closely and they do joint operations, which is the best way to try and disrupt criminal activity at the ports.
Okay, and just a final one from Mark for Jane Poole-Wilson. Surely it's not complicated. Why don't we show ID when we travel on the boat, just like we do on the plane? When you book online, you have to give all your details anyway. So,
I think, Mark, you make a very good point, and I think increasingly people are used to doing that. As I say, I think this is something that we are very, very alive to, and we are considering what is the sensible approach that the travelling public will absolutely understand and recognise is something they're used to doing, but is also a proportionate and important way of us trying to maintain our security and safety from these organised criminals.
Okay, 12:25. Dewan, you're live with the Department of Home Affairs.
Hey, good afternoon, Andy. Afternoon, Jane. Afternoon, Dan.
Afternoon, Dewan.
All right. I hope Head of News had the kettle on for you there and the coffee made, Dan. Back in the hot seat there.
Can't comment, Dewan.
Obviously not. Just following on there, what Mark said, I think is quite right. I mean, a basic photo ID, I think, is acceptable now in for travel most anywhere without overreach of government. And the way our island's going, which is very multicultural at the moment, we don't know who's coming in and out. I think it's time for some basic kind of photo ID. I think most people would accept that. On the overreach of government, I mean, I know in the last 2 or 3 years people have thought that government and Home Affairs, etc., have had overreach all over the world, basically. And I'm looking at the digital ID bill, which had a short window and was shuffled through government very quickly in the UK during the summer. I had a question on that, basically on the same lines of what Julian was saying before. Your intent on following through with these digital ID bill, CDC policy bill and hate crime speech bill, and the concerns of overreach of government in this. My other point is a crossover, really, between yourselves and Manx Care, because it comes into Home Affairs and it comes into the prison service. And that's vulnerable children at the island. Seems to be red flagging up a problem with the foster care and probation of children in danger on the island, and not having anywhere adequate to put these children when there's flags up within the system. The Ofsted report, I believe, was quite critical and was sent back by our government, who commissioned it, to be rewritten, which doesn't sound very healthy in itself, but was very, very critical of the running, especially at middle management, where there was a lack of experience, and at high management, where we've got no affinity to people who actually live here and actually have any kind of affinity to the island. They just take their £500 or £600 a day, which they're on for beer locums, and probably disappear in 2 years. So unlike yourselves, they haven't got an affinity here. The question I'll jump to, because it's quite long-winded, how many young people in the criminal justice system have been in care? Do you know that, Dan or Jane?
Thanks very much, Stu. And I don't know the precise figure. It will obviously vary from time to time. What I do know from previous monitoring we've done, particularly with the police and social services, put in place, I think more than 18 months ago now, a programme called Operation Yarrow, which was absolutely designed to try and identify the most vulnerable young people, a number of whom would be children who are looked after, but not exclusively children who are looked after. And we would regularly see the sort of top 15 young people identified by Operation Yarrow, and a large proportion of them would be looked after young people. The reason they were coming to the attention of Operation Yarrow, because that was a whole programme designed to do exactly what you're talking about, identify young vulnerable children and young vulnerable adults, assess the nature of the risks around them, whether they were vulnerable to criminal exploitation or other exploitation, and then make sure services were working together, because these are often very complicated situations that require different services to partner together, as you've rightly pointed out. So that work was already underway and continues. And then layered over that this summer, the multi-agency safeguarding hub, which is shortened to MASH, has become fully operational. And again, that's about bringing different services together. So the police early action team, children's social care, family social workers, health workers, coming together so that they share information and understand the risks that may be around particularly vulnerable young people, but also vulnerable adults, and can put in place multi-agency plans to protect such individuals. And that work is definitely underway. One thing I should also say at this point, though, Ewan, you did say that the government asked for the Ofsted report to be rewritten. That is categorically not the case. We ask for these inspections for the very good reason it is important, actually, that an external agency comes and does look at our different services. And in Home Affairs, we've done it with HMI coming in to look at the constabulary. HMI have come in to look at the prison and probation service. And it is vital that the public have confidence that when we do this, we do not ever ask them to rewrite such reports. We want their inspection and their feedback.
Okay, final word. Sorry, Dan Davies.
What I was just going to say is there is often a process where errors and omissions are able to be corrected. So where the report writes something that's incorrect, then the government has the opportunity to correct it. But I've seen
factually incorrect.
Factually incorrect, absolutely. So any facts that are incorrect can be corrected. But I've seen the process of the Ofsted report, and I can support the Minister in that. There's been no attempt by government to rewrite or change it.
Okay, final word, John.
Yeah, and I take what you're saying there, Jane, with the MASH, etc. And I believe that the biggest thing is that the system seems to be working not around the children at the moment, but around the system. CAMS is very underfunded, and there's a total lack of finance and social care. So these children are ending up in places either still at risk or staying with families or family members which is not suitable for them. We've got a secure unit, which you seemingly have to go through rings to actually get people into a secure unit, which costs us a lot of money and is very underused. So children who are in need are getting mixed up with children who are problematic. And I think further down the line, that may be going to cause a problem within society if we can't identify that and put the children who need care at risk. And again, we're back to finance again, aren't we?
Okay.
Just maybe to reassure you, Juan, I mean, obviously these are Manx Care provided services, but I do know that the secure unit is very carefully managed. So young people who are in there on remand or because they're serving a sentence are always segregated from any young person who may be in the secure unit for welfare reasons. So I would just like to reassure you on that.
Okay, thanks, June.
Cheers out, thank you.
Good to hear from you. Just a point regarding vaping legislation came in, and this is Alice who just said, you mentioned that vaping legislation going through the branches and the need for scrutiny. In the UK, it goes through the House of Lords, which has experienced law lords and people with experience in scrutinising legal paperwork. In the Isle of Man, we have lay people, if you like, in LegCo, many of whom haven't had that much experience, some, and no relation to legal drafting, and the members have no qualifications to scrutinise legislation. So with this in mind, do we rely on LegCo too much for this?
Well, speaking as a former member of Legislative Council and
an experienced
lawyer, I think we do have people who can provide that level of scrutiny. I think what is important actually about the role of Legislative Council, and I can say this having sat there, is that is an absolute predominant focus of the work of members of Legislative Council. And indeed, one of our members of Legislative Council now, Dawn Kinnish, is also a qualified lawyer by background. So I think, you know, Keys members obviously have a huge amount of constituency work, and many, obviously, people have their day-to-day government work as well on top of the legislative work. But I would always say that the value, actually, of Legislative Council is they absolutely do take the time to take the second look at our primary legislation, and of course they are provided with training and support in how they interpret and scrutinise legislation.
Live today with Jane Poole-Wilson, MHK, Home Affairs and Justice Minister, and Chief Exec Dan Davies. And if you want to get in touch, text, email, call and WhatsApp. Just a quick word, by the way, about some political surgeries this weekend in Douglas Central. Anne Corlett and Chris Thomas are at All Saints Church Hall. They're there from 2 till 4, tomorrow the 14th. Alex Allinson and Laurie Hooper are at Ramsey Town Hall from 10 to midday tomorrow. In Colby, Tim Glover and Jason Morehouse are in Colby, and Daphne Kane and I think it's Aislinn Creer from Garth Commissioners are going to be at Garth Commissioner's office in New Road in Laxey from 10:30 to midday if you want to catch up with your politician this weekend.
Andy Wins, the nation station, makes radio.
Have you been invited to take part in the Household Income and Expenditure Survey? It's one of the most important surveys for our island because the information you provide is vital data for our island's financial planning. It helps us calculate our VAT revenue from the UK. Plus, it gives us a better understanding of the financial strains on residents, so we can support those who are struggling. If you've been invited, please take part. Visit gov.im/HIES for more information.
At Isle of Man Energy, we're excited to offer our customers the Alpha E-Tech efficient hybrid gas boiler and heat pump combination. This state-of-the-art hybrid boiler causes minimal disruption to your existing heating system, making it simple to upgrade. Priced from just £65 a month and with 6-year warranty as standard, which can be extended to 10 years, what are you waiting for? Register for a free consultation at isleofmanenergy.im.
Looking a little tired? Treat yourself to a refresh at Tracy Bell. If you're confused by all you read or see online, Tracy Bell Aesthetic Medical can help. With the expertise of experienced medical practitioners and the latest technology, including laser skin treatment and hair removal, injectables, fat freezing and skin tightening. Call Ben on 613323 to arrange your consultation now. Tracy Bell, helping you to be better.
Join us this weekend, live from the Ross Revenge, with some great music from the 60s to the 90s, some money to win in the Caroline Web Shop, and all sponsored by Turton Tower Woodland Cafe. It's Caroline North, live from the Ross Revenge with Manx Radio.
Radio Caroline North, back on 648 and 1368 AM. The Mannin Line with Andy Wint.
With Jane Poole-Wilson and Dan Davies as well. Last week, the High Bailiff was critical of the delay of bringing in the Sexual Offences and Obscene Publications Act, forced to sentence a man who sent sexually explicit content to children over the internet using the Communications Act, which basically is as if he made nuisance phone calls. Where are we on the Sexual Offences and Obscene Publications Act?
So we have an implementation work programme running, and we published the plan for this, and the aim is to have the Act in by the end of this year. And the reason this takes time is because it's not as straightforward as just switching on the Act and it coming into effect. There's a lot of work that goes on around training for police, prosecutions. There's a lot of work that goes on around the guidance around implementation of this legislation. And in fact, what we did prioritise was the Domestic Abuse Act in Home Affairs. So all of the people that are involved in working up and getting ready to deliver the Sexual Offences and Obscene Publications Act are the same people who did all of the work around domestic abuse, which we managed to bring into effect at the beginning of this year. And as I'm sure listeners will be aware, we have seen put to significant use since it's been in law, and is making a real difference to being able to address those domestic abuse offences. But the work that went into the preparation for that, again, in terms of training, processes, making sure that everybody understood all of the procedures, court forms. There was a huge amount of background work that went into it, so that when the legislation went live, we were pretty confident we were in a good place to actually make it work in practice. And that's exactly the process we're doing with sexual offences now.
Was the High Bailiff out of order to raise concerns?
I think the High Bailiff is quite entitled to reference the fact that, you know, there is legislation coming that will make a difference, and it's absolutely the case that our sexual offences legislation was out of date, and so it is the right thing that we have modernised that legislation. But I think we also have a responsibility when we bring in new laws to make sure that we're on top of how they're going to work in practice, so they are as effective as possible.
Okay, Eddie, you're live with Jane Poole-Wilson and Dan Davies. Hi, Eddie.
Hi, all. My question is to do with an article which I think I read last night. I think the fellow's name is Alex Scott, and I think he was an ex-press officer for chief ministers, numerous of them, I believe.
What's the question, Eddie?
Well, the question is, he is actually claiming that Tim Crocall is proceeding with everything against government rules.
Okay,
now,
in particular, what is it?
Well, give me a chance. Give me a chance to explain it. One of them is he said that some of these manoeuvres he's making, like pre-ordering such and such a thing, needs Tynwald approval. It also needs approval from the public, so on. But he seems to be bypassing them all. Who is right? Is it the Alex Scott, or is it
is this the wind turbines you're talking about, Eddie?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I think you're referring to Alistair Ramsey, who's written a note about his former media officer for the government, who's written about this. Have you seen this, Jane Poole-Wilson?
I have, and thanks, Eddie, for your call. Obviously, this is not a Home Affairs matter, but I think the situation is that, of course, there are rules and procedures. They're the planning system, and no one can proceed to act without acting in line with the standards and rules and procedures around the planning system. So I think we have to be very clear that system operates, and that anyone, whether it's Manx Utilities or otherwise, would need to operate in line with that.
Okay, all right, Eddie.
Is there somebody wrong then? Is somebody out of order by what they're doing? Which one?
I don't think there's anything that has happened to date that is out of order, against the law, or out of step with the planning system. I think it's wrong to suggest otherwise.
OK, all right, thanks, Eddie. Now, your department plan stated that a report on and an update for the road safety strategy was due by June 23. Is it around?
We have been conducting a review on the road safety strategy, actually, because we agreed we would, well, when the road safety strategy initially came in, it was agreed there would be a sort of midpoint review just to take stock of the actions. So that work has been ongoing to look again at actually what has been effective so far, and what else we might want to focus on if we really want to focus on reducing the number of killed and seriously injured on our roads. We are due to publish the output of that in due course.
OK, now regarding, I remember when this was brought up last time you were here, and it was regarding drug driving, and the former Chief Constable in his final annual report warned of substantial shortfall in the police forensic science budget due to the cost of bringing drug driving prosecutions. I think it was I think you mentioned last time, Dan Davies, £600 a time, isn't it, for a drug test?
It's between £600 and £1,000 a time for an evidential blood test, yeah.
So, I mean, this is, I'm not saying it's come out of nowhere, but I mean, it's come in the last 10 years. So is there a budget for this? Can the police afford to do it?
Well, no, it's continuing to rise, and the police forensic budget is actually relatively small, and these costs continue to rise. People, if they're stopped for drug driving, will have a roadside test that tests for the presence of cocaine and cannabis in the bloodstream. And if that roadside test shows positive indication, then it will go away for potentially an evidential test, which costs between £600 and £1,000. And the police are stopping a lot of drug drivers at the moment.
So it's fair to say this is wiping their budget out, this forensic science budget out.
Yes, it is.
So where do we go from here?
Well, I think it's an ongoing challenge. The department is stretched for funding and budget like any other part of the government, and so we're having to absorb those costs from elsewhere, but it's a challenge. I
think the former Chief Constable said there was no facility for urine testing on the Isle of Man.
No, we have to follow Home Office approved standards for testing, so there's no facility for urine or for saliva testing either that's evidentially approved, so we have to go with the blood test at the moment.
Jane Poole-Wilson, is this an appeal to Treasury, or can you reallocate the Home Affairs budget?
So, I mean, as Dan has said, Home Affairs, like all parts of government, is in this inflationary environment is under pressure. And I think the challenge for all of us is not simply to turn to Treasury every time our budgets come under pressure. I think we do have to work very hard ourselves at identifying how we prioritise the spending of our funds. I mean, in Home Affairs, our budget is about 89% of employee costs, because actually most of what we spend is on frontline services, police, fire and rescue.
89%?
Prison and probation, and our emergency services joint control room. So we have relatively little room for manoeuvre when it comes to the inflationary environment that we're in. But it is about working very hard to do the best we can with the budget that we have, including prioritising that when it comes to investigating different criminal matters.
Well, matters aren't going to get easier financially, Dan Davies. So when does the Home Affairs Department set its budget?
Well, we go through the same process every other part of government. The budget process starts sort of around July, when different parts of the government start pulling together what the financial cost pressures might be, and we will put a paper to Treasury. But the Treasury have been very, very clear. There are significant cost gaps, and I think the Department of Home Affairs, in the same way as the Health Service is to some extent, is very demand driven, and we are able to plan for a degree, but if there is a significant incident in the Isle of Man, a significant fire, a murder or a significant assault, that will push costs up, and we're at the mercy. But I have to say that generally we have a good relationship with Treasury, in that Treasury understand the department is really driven by three main cost drivers. There are the demand-based drivers. We have, as the Minister said, we have a significant number of costs relating to staffing costs. We're around about 89%, and heat and light fuel costs are increasing, and we've put in a forecast that our budget for fuel, heat and light will probably increase between 30 and 100% in the next sort of 9 months.
Just to go back to the drug thing, at the moment, tests are sent off the island, is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
Is there any plan for an on-island testing centre?
We don't have the throughput to justify the investment of an on-island forensic service for that kind of testing. So we've got a good relationship with the UK and with UK labs. So we've come to arrangements with other forces who do our forensic testing for us. But there are issues right across the UK with forensic testing, and there are delays, which is frustrating, because ultimately we want to see prosecutions happen as quickly as possible, get them to court and get an outcome, and where there's a victim involved, ensure that the victim sees the outcome as quickly as possible. But forensic testing takes time, and it is a service in demand in the UK. But ultimately, I think if you look at drink driving and how it's no longer normal to drink drive, and I think over time it will become the same in that, you know, it will become less socially acceptable to drive whilst impaired by drugs.
OK, well, live with Home Affairs today on Mannin Line. It's 13 minutes before 1.
We make oil heating easy with our range of services. Whether it's our free smart tank monitoring systems or just our efficient all-island deliveries, Ellen Bannon Fuels has it covered. Call us on 844 000 to find out more.
Everyone's more conscious of energy usage nowadays. So Manx Utilities has begun installing smart meters for standard domestic customers island-wide. With our Smart Living app available too, you'll be in control of tracking and managing your energy. No need to contact us. We'll be in touch when we're ready to fit your smart meter. Visit the Smarter Living page at manxutilities.im. Manx Utilities, delivering a smarter future.
Discover a fabulous range of watches, gifts and jewellery at Ramsey Art Gallery, with top brand watches from Bulova, Citizen Eco Drive and Storm to Acurus, Seconda and Timex. Plus, all watch purchases come with free lifetime watch bracelet adjustment service. There's stunning gold and silver jewellery, gifts for all occasions, and of course a fabulous gallery of limited edition prints and original artworks. Find all this and more at Ramsey Art Gallery, Jewellers and Engravers, opposite Ramsey RNLI shop.
Business owners, if you're looking to get involved in a great local cause, then find out about the Queen's Pier Restoration Trust. Opportunities include helping out and discovery days for staff, along with sponsorship opportunities to help with the restoration. Call Graham on 355 104 to discuss the corporate support options available to keep this historic Manx landmark for future generations. Call Graham today on 355 104. This audio has been kindly sponsored by Paul Carey & Sons.
Get ready for another winning weekend on Manx Radio.
And this weekend, you could win £200 to spend at the Other Place in Ramsey, courtesy of Miller Chaps, the only place you need for a great new look for your home.
Visit manxradio.com and answer the competition question for your chance to win. You can enter as many times as you like.
And then make sure you join us for Manx Radio Breakfast on Monday morning to find out if you're the winner.
Make this your winning weekend with your nation station, Manx Radio.
The Mannin Line with Andy Winch.
Jane Poole-Wilson, MHK, and Dan Davies, the Minister and Chief Executive Officer from Home Affairs and Justice here. Stephen, hello, you're live with Home Affairs.
Good afternoon, Minister, and good afternoon, Dan. Afternoon, Andy, and most importantly, good afternoon, listeners. If I could, if you could indulge me, Minister, I don't really want to talk about your position as Minister for Home Affairs, but I'd rather, if I may, talk about your position as Deputy Chief Minister. I think that is your other title, is it not?
That's right, Stephen, yes.
Yes, now, what I'm concerned over is there seems to be, certainly it seems to be have been accelerated within this Tynwald and this Comin, and that is the protection and the definition and how do we ensure that the Island of Man we remain a small country within the family of the UK, and we don't become a county whereby we farm a lot of our operations out to the UK. I'll give you a couple of examples, if I may. I think it's the Tolson report over housing. And one of the reports in that is to allow the off-island provider to administer it from there and also invest and buy in housing stock. Now, that could be done, could it not? We could allow local authorities to invest money if we've got money to spend. So that's my first example. It doesn't appear that the very people that we would expect to protect our island and the uniqueness of it are doing so. Then we look at the desire to give up work permits. My argument would be, if it takes so quick to process a work permit, then the argument could be, why get rid of them? Because it does give that comfort to people. And then we have where government employs and nominates a lot of people from the UK to senior positions who don't have that connection to the island, and we bring their ideas in, and we end up with another UK type department which runs to a UK standard. And let's just look at the recent problem we've got, whereby we've lost a separate supermarket, which does buy and let the producers put their produce through them. Now, government itself, as I'm sure you will be aware, is a major buyer of produce, and with the prison, the hospital, the schools, etc., and they could surely help more with buying local. So my question to you is, how can we be reassured that you, as Comin, are doing your best to protect the uniqueness of the island, its culture, its identity, and its people from becoming, by de facto, just a county of the UK? Because if that's how we're going to go, should we just simply abolish Tynwald and have an MP going to Westminster?
Thanks, Stephen. And can I reassure you on a very personal level that as a Manx woman born and bred, I so value our uniqueness as an island. I think you've touched on Tynwald already as the body that legislates for us on this island. And for as long as I'm able to have the privilege of doing this role, I am very keen that we safeguard what is unique to us. I also think that we shouldn't be so... we should never close our minds to what we can learn from other places, and that may be the UK, but it's not exclusively the UK. It can sometimes be the other Crown dependencies. It could be further afield. When I think about legislation, sometimes we've looked at New Zealand, for example. But just picking up on a few of the points you've raised, Stephen, I think on the Tolson report around the possibility of a housing association, that actually set out 5 different options, 2 of which were to look at whether or not coming under a UK housing association umbrella would be of interest to the Isle of Man. But in no way is there any decision to do that. Indeed, this is a matter that will be debated in Tynwald next week. And I think the Tolson Partnership itself has suggested that option 1, whereby the DOI housing stock initially be moved into a housing association, might be the best way for us to evolve ourselves if we wish to go down that route. So I think we have to be very, very clear that in asking any external provider to conduct a review for us and to provide some evidence-led information to help us form policy, it is then a matter for Tynwald and Council of Ministers to determine together what is the right thing to do for the Isle of Man. And so I do not regard that as farming out anything, and we wouldn't do that. I think you touched on the recent acquisition of ShopRite by Tesco, and you mentioned government and the amount of procurement we do. And I think you're right. It's absolutely right that when government is able to procure services or food and so on, that we look at how procurement best works and to support our own economy and our local suppliers. So that is absolutely something that we can do and will do.
OK, all right, Stephen, thanks for that. We're just about running out of time, so I've just got a couple of very quick points here for Jane Poole-Wilson and Dan Davies. Helen, why don't we get tough with speeding? Every other car through Crosby is over the limit. Big fines and points would help. Surely this is an easy thing to solve. Surely nobody needs to speed on the Isle of Man.
Couldn't agree with you more, Helen, in terms of I'm absolutely passionate, and Crosby being a lovely part of my constituency, Middle, I absolutely empathise with your feeling on that. I was really keen, actually, that the Police Road Safety Unit worked in collaboration with Moran Commissioners and the school to put up the signs around our locality, Slow Down in Moran. And I think wouldn't it be good if we could all be a little bit more considerate as we drive through each other's areas on this wonderful island and respect the desires of the public to be able to walk and cycle and feel safe on their roads. So agree with you, Helen.
Okay, Dan Davies, do we have any speed cameras on the Isle of Man?
There are no speed cameras on the Isle of Man, Andy.
Okay. And any plans within the department? Is anybody mooting the idea?
Don't think so at the moment, but they are an enforcement tool, and I think it's something that the police would like to look at some point in the future.
Okay, thanks for being with us today, Jane Poole-Wilson, MHK. See you in the new year, won't we?
Thanks, Andy.
All right, and Dan Davies, thanks, Dan. Good to hear from you both today. So it was Home Affairs today. Now, next Wednesday, Deborah Heather and Ranald Corwell will be in from Visit Isle of Man, the chief exec and the chair of Visit Isle of Man. We used to call it tourism, but they say we need 500,000 tourists on the Isle of Man. How do you think we're going to do it? Do you have any advice for Deborah Heather and Ranald Corwell? And the week after that, the airport director, Gary Cobb, will be live on Mannin Line. Thanks for your messages today. We can't quite use everything, but everything is read. Thanks to Chris Quirk on the phones, and have a great weekend.
WINT.
Autumn is a time for harvest, to gather a return, to reap a reward. So this autumn, join the others who have already made their savings grow. Make the most of your money at the Guernsey Bank Skipton International with the 5.75% AER fixed rate savings bond maturing 1st of January 2025. For details of all our savings products, call 01841 730 730 or visit skiptoninternational.com.
No withdrawals allowed until maturity.